Okay, here we go. Well, hey there, friends, and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where three certified Pro Tools experts and avid instructors discuss, demonstrate, and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to the community in the official Avid Support Forum on Facebook. My name's Dave Phillips, audio engineer and lecturer based in the UK. And today we're going to be tackling our first ever Patreon question that comes to us. I know, and comes. Notice Anders didn't cheer. And this comes
I did. I just did it visually.
Okay. This comes to us courtesy of Don, our new Patreon Don. And we met with Don a couple of weeks ago at the Patreon bar. And he was asking us a question about syncing up different Pro Tools systems. So let me find his question. It would be great to go over how the setup for a master and slave system works, and including licensing questions in that. I would like to know if I can use a standard Pro Tools subscription license for the slave if I'm using a Pro Tools Ultimate system for the master. I'd also like to know how to get it all working. Well, with any luck, we'll be able to talk about that today. And Anders has a system set up in his studio where he's got two Pro Tools systems, because that's just what Anders has. He has loads of Pro Tools systems and a Tesla. But of course, before we do that, I want to give a shout out to our other Patreon supporters as well. We've got to say thanks to Mike and Gregor and to Matthew as well, who support us every month along with Don. And just to remind you guys, if you have Pro Tools questions, you can send those directly to us and we'll format those into a video for you. So please do it. And if you want to become a Patreon of Pro Tools Answers, you can head to patreon.com/Pro Tools Answers, and you can select one of the few tiers there to decide how you'd like to support us. Now joining me as ever, and you just met him at Tonkraftwerk in Austria. Give it up for the magical Mr. Anders Motz.
Hello.
And keeping the two of us in check in Tokyo, the maniacal Andy Hagerman.
That's my maniacal laugh.
Maniacal laugh. That was just what I was hoping for. So, how can we contextualize Don's question? He's got two Pro Tools systems. He wants to have them both working in concert with each other. How can we do that?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about this with Don, and to make it even more specific, he is using a Windows PC for his main computer, but for reasons, he's also using a Mac computer for his secondary computer.
He's playing both sides of the fence there.
Yeah, and the reason why he's using a Mac for the second computer is because he's using the Mac DSP box, the hardware unit that he uses for effects, and that's only available to Mac customers, so that's why he's using a Mac as a second computer. Fortunately enough, Pro Tools doesn't really care about stuff like that. It just you can hook up multiple systems, and there's a couple of different ways to do that. Should I start with like the standard way that Pro Tools Ultimate lets us do this, and then Andy, if you want to talk about like how you can do this without using satellite, right?
Well, I think so. I mean, we answered Don's question, when we were having drinks and descending into lunacy. But I think for folks that are listening now, I mean, the real question to be answered at the beginning is, when you have these two systems that are they're for sure going to be sharing audio, right? Mm-hmm. But the question is, do you need them to follow the timeline? In other words, do you need to transmit a positional reference? Many times you don't. And back in the days when I had the hair that you guys both do, a single computer couldn't do all of the work. So it was not uncommon to have a second computer that was just sitting there running virtual instruments, and just had digital cables running to and from it, and all that was needed at that point was a MIDI signal going to those virtual instruments, and then a digital audio signal coming out with a shared word clock controlling the entire system. And if that's the case, it's an easy thing. The only really the thing that you have to remember, if you don't need to have positional reference, is you have to have a single clock controlling the system. Now, that can be a master clock that's controlling the slave system, or you can have a word clock generator that's controlling both of them. There's no plus or minus for both of those. I mean, they both work. And you need to make sure, obviously, that they're both running at the same sample rate. But beyond that, you're pretty much done. And you can set up another system, just put a whole bunch of aux tracks on there, throw a bunch of virtual instruments on. Bob's your uncle, you're done. But it's not going to follow transport. Okay, so you hit the play button on your master system, it'll send MIDI out, play the virtual instruments, and the virtual instruments will send audio coming back to destination tracks on your master system. So that's one way to work.
It's basically like using a proto system like a hardware synthesizer, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. You're using it as a DSP engine.
Yeah, and you said there you can have an external clock providing the word clocking here, but you could also lift that signal, use one of the systems as a master and the other one as a slave, depending on your setup and what you have connected on your computer, right? So it could be just two interfaces talking to each other. Over
and there's no quality difference between the two of those, right? The lower jitter clock, it will affect how you hear the audio, but as long as both of them are following the same clock, there will be no drop samples, which is the real reason you want to avoid the clicks and pops. As long as you avoid the clicks and pops, job is done, right?
Yeah.
But that, and I think it's easy to, let's just take that and put it to bed. That's how you synchronize two systems if you don't need to have positional reference going on. Now, if you do want to have positional reference going on, now we're getting into a little bit more of a complex situation. And I think that's, Anders, where you're going.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about that setup that you just described?
Sure.
So if you only have like an interface that has like a stereo output on the digital transfer, it could be an analog also as well, but if you only have a stereo out, so would you mix that signal in the secondary proto system, meaning that the satellite system, or how would you do that?
Well, so that's a big compromise right there.
Yeah.
So once if I'm dealing with, let's say I've got my master system here that I'm working on, right? And I want to, I've got my slave computer that's just basically processing things, right? Ideally, I want to be able to mix only on my main system. I don't want to have to do a submix.
Yeah.
Okay, and what you're talking about is a submix, on that other machine, and you would basically have to wheel your chair over there, get the levels right, and then everything's going to get summed into a stereo output. At that point, your creative options become pretty seriously limited, because then you've got potentially an orchestra's worth of extra stuff that's on a stereo file, and if you wanted to make change, you have to wheel your chair over there again, do tweaks, and do it over again. So you want to avoid that. You really do.
Totally, but it can be done this way, and I mean,
Sure.
Sometimes having limits to your setups can also be very creative. You can come up with stuff, and you have to commit. And for at least, I mean, we all started out on tape, and we've done this. Yeah.
That's why I'm not creative, because I don't do well with limits.
It's Andy Unlimited. Yeah. Okay. So let's. So your main system could be any system. It could be a Proto standard version, and your secondary computer could be any system as well. It doesn't have to be Ultimate. It can just be standard Pro Tools, and you just need to.
Doesn't even need to be Pro Tools.
Yeah. Exactly.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
And how are these connected up then, Anders?
In that case, like Andy said, so having word clock synchronization would be the best thing to have, and then you would use just basically MIDI cable between these computers to have the MIDI information sent to the virtual instruments.
And then, of course, you need the audio to come back to the main system, because hopefully that's where you're doing your mixing. Now, could you have analogs? Yeah, you could, right? You could have analog signals going from that system, but that's there is a potential of introduction of noise and so on and so forth, which is why I would definitely opt for a digital situation. So I would opt for some sort of a digital interface that's spitting out ASEBU or MADI. MADI would probably be
ADAT.
Or ADAT, yep, sure.
Yeah.
Depending, and that really it's going to depend, or Dante, right? So there's a lot of different options out there that don't have to get too expensive, right? Because with a digital only interface, it's not doing any conversion. So you could actually save some money if you had a system there that doesn't have any analog inputs and outputs. It's just digital, and then you just send the digital back into your system, and you don't lose any quality there. And that's why I would like to do that, because this is a pretty advanced system, and if we're going to do that, let's avoid sonic compromises if we can.
So in terms of the cabling, we're talking about MIDI being just the transport, and then
there is no transport.
There is no transport, so it's basically sending a MIDI signal. So you're using the second system as just a virtual instrument farm. It's like a hardware synthesizer, but it's a Pro Tools system, actually.
Okay, I probably used the wrong term. Would synchronization and control signals be a better way to describe it, maybe?
There's no synchronization, there's no control. All that's being sent through that MIDI cable is the MIDI that is controlling those virtual instruments.
Okay. Understood.
You see what I'm saying?
Understood.
So this is the simplest, and we used to do this all the time, and we used to have to, right? Because virtual instruments used to bring a system to its knees. So MIDI, you have a MIDI track. That MIDI track is not an instrument track that's going inside of Pro Tools. It's a MIDI track that is going out of a MIDI interface. Okay, that MIDI interface is going into a MIDI interface input of the destination computer. That MIDI is playing virtual instruments on the slave computer. Those instruments make sound. Those output sounds are going somehow back to your master computer, preferably as a digital signal.
Yep. So it's basically using the second system as a virtual instrument. Yeah.
Just a similar to a rack mount instrument. It's not that different.
Great. So the second option, and this is where it starts getting a bit techy, and this is where you need transport to be locked. So basically you can have audio playing on both of the computers, and Pro Tools has a way to lock those two computers sample accurately, so that you and 2 is not the limit here. You can even go further than that. So you can have is it 11 now, Andy? 11
you can have 12, and I'm going to cancel you. I'm going to correct you on one point, just because this is Pro Tools Answers and we have no egos here. Biggest lie I've told in my life. It's not sample accurate. It's frame edge aligned. So it is. So what we're talking, and that's a significant thing to keep in mind, is your frame edge aligned, and sometimes you will be sample accurate, sometimes you won't, and it could be anywhere between perfectly aligned to a quarter of a frame off.
So in this setup, you need to have 2 Ultimate systems. So you need both of them to be Pro Tools Ultimate, and they both need to be Pro Tools hardware systems, meaning you need hardware interface like an HD native HDX system or something like that. And not only that, for this to work in perfect synchronization, you should ideally have a sync HD for both of those systems. So Andy, I see you want to inject here.
Yeah. So I had a question, and so I chatted this afternoon with one of my colleagues over here in Japan, and he was on his way to a family vacation, and he still made time to answer my question thoroughly. So thank you, Daniel Lovell, if you're listening, for your answers here. So let me real quickly show you a way that the system is meant to be set up, and then we'll talk about some of the ways that you can get around it. So if you guys can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll get that out of the way. There we go, because we're professionals. So what we have, this is a very simple video satellite system that has a media composer system and a Pro Tools system. Now you can have, as Anders said, you can have up to 12, and that could be up to 11 Pro Tools systems and 1 media composer system that will be doing your video, or you can have up to 12 just Pro Tools systems. So you can get into a very, very big and powerful setup. Now, one of the things that this has, and this is the way it's kind of meant to run, is at the very top you have this thing called video reference. And a video reference is a box that everybody in post-production knows about, but very few people outside of post-production know what it does. What it does, and if you take a look at your screen, you can see here I've got my little Blackmagic sync generator right here. This is a black burst generator. It is also called house sync. It's also called video reference. And what it does is it sends out frame pulses in a similar way as word clock sends out sample pulses. And this video reference is now going to a Sync HD or a Sync X on the Pro Tools side, or it goes into the video reference in of the Avid peripheral. Now, your question is, and this is where I got something a little bit off the beaten path. This is from Daniel. If you don't do post-production, and for is it Dan's or Don's?
Don.
Don. Don's in a music studio. So yeah. I asked Daniel, do you need video reference? He said no. In fact, you don't even need that Sync X. You can get around it by having one of the devices be a word clock master, and then have that word clock go to a slave device. So
yeah, but in that case, Andy, don't want to correct you again. You corrected me before, but in that case, you would actually get sample accuracy, and you'd get that using video reference as well, right? I
asked him the exact same question. He said, no, you'll still get up to a quarter frame off because of the Ethernet clocking, which changes the start and stop parts. So the audio will be aligned. But the start and stop could be up to a quarter sample off. So you still don't, and I asked him this specifically, you still don't want to have stuff that needs to be perfectly phase aligned on two different machines.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes total sense. Should we look at my setup? I've got a similar setup here using two music computers instead.
There we go. So this is the way that it's set. I will stop sharing my screen so that Anders can. And so actually it turns out that you can do video satellite a bit less expensive than I thought you could this morning, by going with word clock. If you don't need to have a black burst generator like this, then that's one part of the equation that you can take out.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll talk you through how to set up a satellite system. Satellite system. There are a couple of different versions of this and a couple of different ways to do this, but. And it's a fairly complex setup. So basically you would need at least two computers, obviously, for it to work. And both of these computers need to have Pro Tools Ultimate, and they need to be HD systems. So meaning you need an HDX card or an HD native card, and obviously a couple of interfaces. You can connect up to 12 computers in one network and basically have them play as one unit, which is what this setup is all about. In some cases, you would even use one of those computers to be running Media Composer to output the video, but that's depending on your goals here. So in my setup, I've got my Mac Pro behind me, which has a Matrix Studio as the interface, and it's also got a Sync HD to keep it in sync with stuff. And the other computer, which is over there, you can't see it, but that's a Mac Mini using an Omni interface and also a Sync HD. And both of these computers are connected to a video reference generator. So this is my particular unit. It's behind me. It's an Aja Gen 10, but there are other units that you can use. And this one is really good and stable, but it's a bit fiddly to make adjustments to. If you've got the Sync X device from Avid, that has a built-in video reference generator, so there's no need for this here. So I said video reference generator. These puppies have a couple of different names: video reference, black burst, house sync, but it's basically the same unit that we're talking about. So this is outputting a video signal with a very precise timing. So all of the other computers, or all of the computers, can have a speed that's common between them, so they don't drift apart. Much like word clock for music, but this is primarily using video here. So on my main computer, if I look into the session setup, you will see that the clock master in this system is the Sync HD, and it's using the incoming video reference signal to adjust the speed of Pro Tools. Whereas the positional reference is LTC, or longitudinal time code. Very important step here is to make sure that the video reference format, the format that Pro Tools is expecting to receive, is the same as the video reference generator is actually outputting. And my video reference generator is outputting 1080p at 25 FPS, so that's my setting. And as you can see here, Pro Tools is receiving the signal, it's locked to the signal, and it doesn't have to recalculate anything. It seems to be the same speed as he is expect. If we look into the my second computer, which is this one, you can see here that exactly the same settings have been made. It's using the Sync HD as the clock reference, and also video reference is the clock reference here. And as you can see, the same frame rate, and everything is locked and looks good. So what I do when I set up one of these systems is I'll start with the satellite, not the master administrator system, but I'll set up all of the satellites first. So you go into setup, and in peripherals you have a tab called satellites, and that's exactly what we need here. So if I go into satellites, you can see here that I've named this system Tonkraftverk 2. Obviously you can choose any name here, and I've set the mode to be a satellite. It's not the administrator, it's a satellite system here. And then the other really important thing that you need to make sure is that the TCP UDP port is set to a port that's open, and this port needs to be the exact same on all of your systems. So we've got 28282 here. Let's make sure that that setting has been made in the main system as well. So switching back to that system here and going into setup peripherals on the main system. And as you can see here, the system name is Anders Mac. And it's an administrator, and system 1 is obviously the administrator system, and the TCP UDP port is the same as the other system as well, 28282. And now I can just assign all of my satellites to the different systems. And as you remember here, I said up to 12 computers can be in the same satellite network, so I can assign up to 12 computers here. So if I click on this here, there is just one other computer in my network right now. So I'll select that one. And I'll hit OK. And can't really see anything happening here. But when I open the transport window, we should have a new little synchronization button here, and this is the one here, which is allows me to link up to the satellite network. So now this computer is linked up to the satellite network. So let's look at the other one. And this guy now is also part of this system here, and it also has a link button, as you can see, and I can link that up as well, and both of my systems are visible down here as well. So now, since both of these computers are receiving play start markers, let's look on the main computer again. And when I press play here, you can see transport is rolling, and both of these machines are online. And if I flick over to the other system, you can see that has the synchronized playback here. So they're both playing back in sync. And basically the video reference makes sure that none of the computers will be faster or slower than the other. And the positional reference is transmitted over the LAN cable, as well as any start and stop, play and record messages and stuff like that.
So that's how you set up a simple two-computer system. And here's, just so you can see over here, here's how it might look in a more more extensive 8-system kind of situation. And the cool thing is that on any system, any of the users can either leave or re-enter the satellite family by just clicking the little name there. So for example, let's say I'm on the Dubber system here, and Anders is on music and Dave is on effects. Any one of us could disengage anyone else, right? So no matter what computer you're at, you have all the control over the satellite system that you need. Now the other thing, you saw that Anders set this up by Ethernet. Now Ethernet will go stupid every once in a while. And you'll see that this green button right here, if it turns gray, then you know you've got a problem with your network port. And there's a quick setup. It is Power Claw, which is Control Option Command, and click on this button will reset the clock between the Ethernet. So it resets your Ethernet so that your system will go together. It's just one of those things. It doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, you want to be able to get out of there. That's how you do it. It's like Power Claw and click on this network button, and it'll reset. Everything will go offline for a second, and then they'll come right back on, and everything's fine. Now, one of the things that I think people miss, and this is, I think, something that's going to help Don. Thank you. Don's question is the satellite preferences. So
he's not forgetting you, Don. And Andy's brain is like a browser with 50 tabs open. Some of them might be porn.
On a 486 laptop. And Anders, keep me honest on what tab this satellite is on. It is, I believe, in synchronization.
Synchronization, yeah.
Okay, great. So in synchronization, in the lower right-hand corner, you're going to find your satellite preferences. Let's talk about these one at a time. If you check transmits solos, then when you hit solo on whatever system that has that preference, it will send out through the Ethernet connection a message saying, I've soloed a track. Now, other computers could either react to that message or they can ignore it. So, for example, for Don's system, what he wants to do is he wants to have both of his systems transmit solos and receive solos, which means you could have two computers with two Pro Tool systems hit solo on one system, and not only does it mute the tracks on its system, but also the tracks on the other system, which makes two computers act just like one, which is fantastic. Solo independent of link state, if you check this, then even if you've taken yourself out of the satellite group, it will still react to solos. And that's, I think, for Don's system, that could be on or off. It probably doesn't matter. This is one that I think is important. AAE errors stop all linked systems. So if you have 12 systems, one of them could throw up an AAE error. You don't usually want to have all your systems keep on playing. You want that to stop the whole shebang. In that case, you want to turn that preference on. And then finally, the transmit and receive play selections. So what happens is, again, kind of like the transmit and receive solos, if you click the transmit play selections checkbox and make a selection on the timeline, it sends that information through the Ethernet connection. Again, your other systems in the satellite network can be set up to either receive that, and you'll see it on the other system as well, or they can ignore it. In other words, they'll still play at the same time, but there won't be any selection. That's I will tell you, most of the time I start out building a system with all of these preferences enabled, and work backward from there. So in a post-production situation, I would, for example, not receive solos. So you don't want your dub or deck go mute because you've soloed a track on the dialogue computer or something like that. For this music system, I would say you probably do want to leave it on. Anders, you've probably worked with these preferences. What are your thoughts on any of these?
Yeah, it depends on your setup really, and the task that satellite needs to perform. Some of them I will just receive stuff on, and they never ever have to transmit anything. And it depends on the task. So as you said, in Don's case, I would start off by having everything on.
Yeah. And when you do, it's a pretty powerful experience. To have 2, 3, 11 computers, 12 computers that all act as if they were one thing, and you can move your chair to any one of those computers and have equal amounts of control, or you can have colleagues working at other computers and have you can have a connected environment, not just a synchronized environment, which is so cool to work in. Satellite is one of my favorite things that Avid has done in the last half decade or so.
Yeah, it every time I'm doing this in like a real world scenario, it just blows my mind that it works and that it's just such a smooth experience, and everything is just like it's magic.
No, it is pretty cool. So again, I mean, if you want to just have a computer that's basically a processing farm, you can do that with word clock. And you don't need positional reference, you're done. Just send MIDI over and send audio back. But if you want to have a system that is locked together with another system, satellite is the way that you want to do it.
I hope we answered Don's question. I'm sure we did.
Don also had another question about licensing.
Yeah.
And for Pro Tools Ultimate, satellite is included. So there used to be a separate license. There is no longer. There used to be a satellite LE license, but my research today shows that has expired with version 10 point something.
The licensing, yes, but there's still a version of this called the Satellite LE system, which is where you have a Pro Tools Ultimate hardware system like I have here. And if you're using a standard Pro Tools system, that could be any standard Pro Tools system here, and no specific interface, you can have that playing back video. Just the video, and there is no real sample accurate or frame edge alignment here. It's just basically using that as a video transport device then, and that's a way to offload some strain off your computer. It will not be frame edge synced, but you can still use it.
So the suggestion is then that if with all of the systems, Pro Tools 8, Pro Tools Ultimate is a requirement.
Yeah, for both of them, or for all three of them. Yeah,
yeah, but the hardware requirements for satellite are a bit less than they used to be. So you don't have to have the Sync HD or the Sync X. It seems if you want to just go with word clock, you can do it, and I don't know if we're going to call that officially supported, but it seems to work. So, try it and see how it works for you.
Great stuff. I think we can bring the episode to a close. Awesome stuff, guys. Thank you very much, Anders. That was really interesting, and Andy, all of that stuff was so interesting. For me, who just works on music, I'd never really touch video, very, very rarely, and even then, it's still all within my closed system anyway. So I never get to experience this stuff. It's really been interesting. So hopefully that was also interesting to you. If you're liking what you're doing, you can hit like on the video, hit the bell icon so you get notified of every time we release a new video onto YouTube. If you head over to ProToolsAnswers.com, you can subscribe over there. You'll get a nice little email from Andy every week. Is that right?
Yeah, sometime during the week.
And there's a couple of free Pro Tool sessions that Andy is giving away with those, and you need to subscribe to be able to get hold of those. There's some really interesting stuff in there. And if you want to support us at Pro Tools Answers, you can head over to Patreon. You can do that over there at patreon.com/Pro Tools Answers, and we'd appreciate as much support as is possible to give. All it leaves me to say is thank you very much to Anders.
Thank you.
And thank you to Andy.
You bet.
My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.